Hello and welcome to Fowl Plays, where we look at tales of tabletop tragedy that are sure to ruffle some feathers. I'm your host, Boss Goose, and in today's story, we have a player who says they'll be participating as a co-DM in order to help the inexperienced DM run the game. But they quickly begin turning their NPC into a main character of the story and do little to no work to help the other DM, while the rest of the players who are unfamiliar with the game system struggle to participate, as the campaign plot is vague and there is little information prepared. As the game continues, several red flags are raised, and eventually the game does fall apart when co-DM decides to attack a fellow player and laughs as it instantly downs them, leading to the party deciding it's best to go their separate ways. But before we get to that, there's no time for a game today, as a thief has infiltrated my personal vault and stolen one of my valuables from within. We have to do inventory quickly to find out what was taken. I've already checked most of it, but I haven't found my ribbon, golden egg, or diary yet, and I need you to determine which of these last three items are missing. So please go ahead and make your choice, and I'll verify your answer in 3, 2, 1... And if you guessed my diary, then sadly you are correct, and right now some ne'er-do-well is delving into my private goose thoughts. I knew I should have kept it under the nest. And if you guessed incorrectly, then don't worry, you can still make it up to me by helping me upgrade my security level, simply by hitting that subscribe button, which will provide you with updates on whenever new content is available on my channel, give easy access to hours of already existing videos, and set off an alarm if anyone tries to sneak into my vault again. Now, while I mourn the loss of my private thoughts, without any further delays, it's time to take your seats and wet your beaks as we dive on into today's tale. So my roommate and I watch a lot of RPG horror videos, and we never really thought we'd have our own RPG horror story, but here we are. Our roommates at the time had an idea for a Pathfinder campaign that they wanted to run. It seemed like it could be fun, so we gathered 2 other players together and decided to try it out. Obviously it turned out horribly, or else I wouldn't be posting here, and set off a domino effect in which my roommate and I eventually had to move out of our apartment. Let's begin. Names and such for privacy's sake. Me, playing a human gunslinger. F, friend and current roommate, playing a skinwalker vigilante. S, friend of mine and F, playing remotely as a halfling barbarian. M, friend of F, DM and co-DM, playing remotely as an Ifrit. I don't remember what class, just not a spellcaster. DM and co-DM. Mine and F's roommates and friends at the time, married couple, never DM Pathfinder, only played. Co-DM playing a fetchling oracle. So to start off, all the players in the story were new to Pathfinder. We're all used to 5e and expressed our preference for it, but DM and co-DM wanted to use Pathfinder for the greater character customization. Because all of us players weren't savvy with the system, and honestly didn't receive much in terms of help from the DM or co-DM when it came to creating our characters, we all went pretty basic, and none of us wanted to play a spellcaster. DM even told us to disregard some of the rules and class features the second any of us questioned them or thought that they were weird, and said not to worry about them because they were dumb. Co-DM said they'd play an NPC to help us out since we were lacking spells. We were all okay with this at first. DM and co-DM also wanted to start us off at level 3, but since we were so unfamiliar with the system, we shot this idea down and wanted to start at level 1. I wasn't sure how a co-DM situation would work, but I was willing to try it out. Figured it couldn't be too bad. I thought, okay, DM will probably be the one telling a story, doing all the crunchy stuff, and maybe running a few NPCs. Co-DM is probably going to be the one running most of the NPCs, making it so DM doesn't have to RP with herself when multiple NPCs are involved, and helping with the plot and world building. Note, this was a completely homebrew world meant to be set in a fantasy 1920s to 1940s. I was told it'd be kind of Bioshock or Legend of Korra-esque in terms of setting, and that's about all the info we ever got for the world. There was a very basic map and a few bullet points about each area, so as players, we didn't really know how to incorporate our characters, since we knew next to nothing about the world or how it worked. We figured it'd be easy enough to ask questions to the DM or co-DM in the Discord server, or in mine and F's case, we could ask in person. But even when asked, the pair would never really give a straight answer and tell us to fill in the blanks ourselves. Unsurprisingly, we weren't really able to figure out how we fit in the world. Despite us players not really being clear on much of anything, Session 1 rolls around. We start out in a big holy city, all characters just out on the street minding their business, being in the city for different reasons. We have a pretty standard save the quest giving NPC from bandits encounter, so 4 level 1 players and co-DM's NPC had to be at least level 5, against a few bandits. It was painfully easy and proceeded to be our only combat for the entire time we played. We save the NPCs and they take us to a bar because they need help recovering a stolen MacGuffin item. I immediately know that this is related to my character's backstory, as he was the one who stole that MacGuffin. This was an idea that I had suggested to DM since she was struggling with creating plot points that could tie our characters directly to the story. I was pretty excited to see her include the idea we discussed, but also surprised. I didn't expect it to come into play during the first session, but okay. F's character is a bit of a playboy, so he hits on the Moon Elf NPC, and they end up in the same room that night. Fine. We aren't a group that's against boinking NPCs, so long as it's a side detail and not a central focus of the game. The rest of the party goes with co-DM's NPC to buy drugs. For context, DM and co-DM are fans of silly, goofy games, but assured us this would be a more serious campaign. Then the first red flag goes up. DM offhandedly says that the drug dealer is a gnome, at which the co-DM goes off, screaming and complaining that they hate gnomes and screw gnomes, gnomes suck, they can't stand gnomes. Me and F sitting at the table are just staring at awe, and M and S over Discord are completely silent. This was literally a nameless NPC who didn't matter whatsoever. We managed to smooth things over by emphasizing how little this character mattered and keep the roleplay going. Co-DM's NPC pays for the drugs because, by their own words, he just uses his mom's checkbook, which basically just meant, I don't want to have to keep track of money. Okay, whatever. Session 2. The next in-game day, we meet up at a temple where the Moon Elf worships. We get more information about the MacGuffin and are asked if we can help recover it. We all agree, but some characters have business in town that they need to take care of first. All the players end up getting a small section focused just on them as they wander the town. M has to take someone's baby and give it to the Fae. S has an encounter with a time traveler and gets a skateboard. F has a meeting where he must don his noble persona. My character bumps into a former flame at a bar and they catch up. And co-DM's NPC also has a section where he meets with someone who gives him some ominous information. It's also revealed that this NPC has a tattoo of significant importance and is very clearly a central figure to what little plot is being set up. I thought it was a little weird that an NPC is getting player treatment, but decided to dismiss the thought for now. It's kind of a clusterfuck as these little sections start to overlap strangely, and there's some backpedaling and redoing of scenes. DM isn't really experienced as a DM, so things get a little confusing, but whatever. I get that there's a learning curve and some clunky storytelling is to be expected. F happens to DM 5e games quite frequently, and he was willing to overlook it, so I did the same, assuming it would just get better over time. But it really starts to go downhill from there. I had messaged the DM previously with some ideas I had, since this particular section was obviously a plot hook for my character. The stealing of the MacGuffin was supposed to be a long-running thing. It was something I really emphasized. My character is on the run because he stole some super important thing, but no one knows who did it. But at this point, we're heading into Session 3, there's been maybe 3 in-game days, and the DM isn't sure how to keep the suspense going or keep my character from being found out. I suggest another idea to the DM, that maybe F's character can get framed for the theft, seeing as the description of the thief could work for either character. Male, wearing a hat, wearing a cloak. DM liked this idea and decided to implement it as well. At this point, you might be wondering why I was dictating so much of the game to the DM when she should be the one with the creative control. But DM had actually asked me and F to give her any ideas we had for the game because she was working long hours at her job and had very little time to brainstorm. When we asked if co-DM was helping her at all, since, you know, they're co-DM, DM would assure that they would help here and there, but if that was the truth, we never saw any proof of it. Co-DM would often pause the sessions to ask the DM to clarify story points to them as if it was their first time hearing them, and would never be able to answer any of the players' questions. The only thing co-DM would know about was their special NPC and things that pertained to him. Session 3. The party returns to the temple after all their personal matters are resolved, and are given the news by the Moon Elf that some witnesses have provided a vague description of someone they saw slinking around. A man wearing a hat and some sort of cloak/cape. But they didn't get a good look at him. F's character also wears all black and a mask, so obviously he's suspicious looking. Moonelf proceeds to use Zone of Truth on him and asks him if he stole it. F passes the save, but it didn't really matter anyway because he didn't steal it. And that's that. The whole framing business was resolved with one dice roll and it took about 2 minutes. I was a little bummed because I thought it would be a cool idea and it was resolved so quickly. The Moon Elf then comes to my character, which catches me off guard. She then casts Zone of Truth on my character and asks me the same question. I'm freaking out internally because this is my character's whole plot relevance and it's down to one dice roll. I managed to pass the save and my character lies and says he didn't do it. Moon Elf accepts the answer and the party is tasked with going a few towns over to meet with a seer, who might be able to help us find this stolen item. Party plans to go the next day. Mine and F's characters, being horny bastards, decide to mess with another of the DM's NPCs, a tiefling, and invite him to the inn for a night of fun. When co-DM hears this, they immediately shove their NPC into the situation as well, and the session ends. F and I had discussed privately a few of the weird things we'd noticed during game. I mentioned how the Zone of Truth thing could have been real shit for me if I had failed the save, and I really didn't see how I would be able to continue playing my character if I had failed and been found out. And we both commiserated over being just a little bored during the sessions, and could only imagine how our remote players were feeling. DM and co-DM have a big issue of getting off topic and going off on tangents in the middle of games. They not only did this in their own game, but also in the 2 games that F DM'd at the time that they were players in. These tangents would be about anything and everything. Memes, anime, other games they've played in, their own personal characters, etc. At times, they'd even discuss and roleplay completely hypothetical scenarios. During session, I understand some off-topic conversations, it happens, but at times there would be more tangents than there would be actual game time. So yes, this would also take place during their own game. At the very least, F and I could sometimes get back on track since we were there in person, but M and S being remote just kinda had to sit there and wait. In fact, sometimes S would just private message me over Discord just so that we could continue whatever RP we had been doing in-game before the DM and co-DM got distracted. Anyway, F and I had some apprehension. We discussed with DM and co-DM the possibility of switching over to 5e at some point, since we and S were having a really tough time with Pathfinder, and we didn't feel the DMs had enough knowledge of the system to run a long-term homebrew campaign. Plus, living with DM and co-DM, F and I could see some of the work being done on the campaign. And again, we only ever saw DM working on things. Even then, it was usually just drawing NPC icons for Roll20. The server that housed all the world building information remains unfinished to this day. I accidentally stumbled across some information that only furthered these apprehensions. Through DM and co-DM, we had met some of their friends and people they had played with. They have a big group Discord server just for chatting and whatever. These friends added F and I to the server at some point, so one night I was just kind of scrolling through the server, seeing what everyone was up to, scrolling back a little bit in the chat to before we were added. And I happened upon some conversations with DM discussing the campaign and her plans for stuff. The basic plot was going to be something like all the PCs have a connection to a god, but they aren't aware of it, and each of the PCs were going to have an individual plot line regarding this. Okay, nothing too weird. Until I saw that co-DM's NPC was also getting this treatment as well. None of our PCs seemed to have any concrete ties to the story, but this NPC that was supposedly just there to help us get our footing was going to have a whole plot arc revolving around him. I brought this up to FNS. We all agreed that it seemed like co-DM just wanted to be a player, but with special privileges. DM and co-DM would sit on the same side of the table and freely look at the same Roll20 screen. So co-DM would know everything that was happening behind the DM screen, never had to keep track of money or resources, but still got to play as a PC with a central contribution to the story. We were just about ready to call it right then and there, and tell DM and co-DM that we really didn't want to continue with the campaign. But because they were our friends, and roommates, which could make things awkward, we decided to try and at least do a few more sessions. So, Session 4, the Orgy Session. We left off with mine and F's character bothering the Tiefling NPC, and co-DM inserting their NPC into it. We assumed that the next session would just start with a fade to black and waking up in the morning. We were so wrong. The characters get back to the inn and proceed to get it on. Me and F were laughing awkwardly at the table and being like, oh, haha, we're doing this? We humored it for a bit, but it went on and on. The scene eventually panned over to M and S's characters, and we thought that maybe now the fade to black was coming. Nope. Somehow, M and S's characters also got roped into the orgy. F continually says, haha, we really don't have to RP this, DM. We can get on with it. Trying to tell her in a nice way that we should move on from the scene as it's way past the point of being funny. Meanwhile, co-DM is giggling and smiling and having the time of their life. DM responds to F and says, no, it's fine. I just want you guys to have fun. And none of us had the heart to tell her that, no, we weren't having fun. As I mentioned before, no one in the group has a problem with sexual encounters in-game. But this was just gratuitous and unnecessary. And that was like the whole session. 4 whole hours. 4 hours in which the players would give awkward, half-hearted responses to the DM's prompting and listen to co-DM's self-indulgent RPing about getting it on with the tiefling NPC. We were so ready to quit after that session. But again, we didn't want things to be awkward in our apartment, and DM mentioned that she might switch us over to 5e soon. So we had hope. We could stick it out just a little bit longer. Thus came our 5th and final session. The party boards a train to get over to where the MacGuffin was last seen. Everyone does a little RP on the train. My character goes and orders some drinks for himself from the bar, telling the barkeep to just put it on the co-DM's NPC's tab. This hadn't been a problem previously, and co-DM's NPC was constantly throwing money around willy-nilly, seeing as he had Mommy's checkbook. But suddenly, when my character dares put his drinks on co-DM's tab, they throw a fit, and their character starts berating mine and saying that he isn't paying, etc, etc. He even starts calling my character a criminal, which he is, but their character has no knowledge of that. He hadn't done anything illegal in the time the party had been together. I just ignore their metagamey rant and proceed to leave the train. The party gets off at the stop and has to continue on foot for a bit until they can get into a nearby town where we were supposed to meet the seer who apparently had more information about this stolen MacGuffin. Along the road, we run into a lost girl and an automaton. We try to help her out. F suggests a course of action that gets talked over. Co-DM then suggests the exact same thing that F had said, as if it was their own idea, and suddenly that becomes the next course of action. My character takes a particular liking to the lost little girl and takes a big brother role with her. DM and I proceed to have a far too long conversation in character, despite me giving cues multiple times that my character is just going to be saying much of the same, and just being like, okay, and he continues to talk to her as we walk. Unfortunately, as seen in the last session, DM has an issue of not knowing when to end things, so I struggle through some repetitive small talk for about 20 minutes. As we're entering the nearby town, we have a small bathroom break or something, and DM mentions, you guys weren't supposed to adopt that NPC, so I guess I have to add her now. We were baffled by this. This character served no purpose and provided nothing, and we could have just skipped over her entirely. We picked her up assuming that she must have been there for a reason, but we're once again at a loss over what to do with our newly acquired dead weight, seeing as the DM apparently had no plans for this character. We resume and get to the town. We meet the seer and she says she has a way to allow us to view the scene that unfolded when the MacGuffin was stolen. Obviously my character doesn't want this to happen, but it would be suspicious for him to interfere himself. So I turn to S's character and offer her a trade if she uses her slingshot to disrupt the scene. The character is pretty wild and feral, so she's happy to fuck things up. So S shoots out some candles the seer was using, distracting and delaying her. Co-DM has their character come over, and they state that they're using a spell on S. DM says, okay, roll to hit, or is it a save? Co-DM proudly states, nope, it's a touch spell. There's no save and no roll to hit. It's one of my oracle abilities. DM looks over at whatever co-DM has pulled up on their computer and reads it and says, okay, yeah, I guess. Also note, this entire time, co-DM has not had a character sheet and pulls numbers out of their ass when it comes to modifiers and rolls. Co-DM's character grabs S by the arm and uses some sort of chill touch. S asks if there's anything they can do, to which they are told, no, it's a touch spell, it just happens. CoDM rolls damage and then smugly says, 11 cold damage. S, who is the sweetest, kindest person alive, who never raises their voice at anyone, says over the mic, well, I'm fucking dead. F and I, in our years of knowing S, have never heard this tone of voice from them. They're pissed. CoDM immediately starts laughing, as if they didn't believe S, and when no one else is laughing with them, they start backpedaling and not understanding why S was dead. To which F and I responded, we're level 1. S had 10 HP. My character grabs S's body, and the DM allows me to give her a health potion because, surprise surprise, we don't have a healer. My character starts to yell at CoDM's NPC and asks him what the fuck he thought he was doing, and that he just attacked one of his own party members. CoDM's NPC whines and says he didn't mean to and that he didn't know he'd knock S out. My character, and myself, is having none of it, and just takes S's character in his arms and says he's leaving. F's character cares a lot about morality and justice and also begins to leave, and tells CoDM's character that he doesn't want to work with someone who would so easily kill one of their companions. DM is freaking out at the table and trying to get NPCs to convince us to stay. F has to tell DM out of character, there is no in-character reason that my character would stay, I want you to know that. So F stays for the DM's sake, and M stays to view whatever the seer is going to show them. And she shows them the scene. My character stealing the MacGuffin. Plain and simple. No doubt about it. The session ends on a weird note and the DM says, you guys can be level 2 now. No one says much, but F, S, and I talk on Discord later. We don't see how there is a way to continue. My character's plot relevance has been resolved, and what else is there for him besides going to jail? Realistically, none of the other characters are going to fight for him. They've known one another for about 3 to 4 days. And there would be really horrible animosity between CoDM's NPC and the rest of the party. And more than anything, we just weren't really having a good time. We also searched every Pathfinder resource that we could find to try to figure out what the fuck spell or ability CoDM used. We searched for hours with no luck. We could find absolutely nothing that didn't require a save or a roll. F goes to break the news to DM that the 3 of us don't want to continue, and DM sadly says she understands. F suggests that maybe running something easier like Monster of the Week might work, or maybe one day adapting whatever DM wanted to do with this campaign over to a traditional 5e Faerun setting might work. But maybe doing this with more preparation, as starting this campaign seemed super rushed. But yeah, the situation was pretty sucky overall. The game only ran for 5 sessions, DM was super rushed into getting the game ready to play by CoDM, despite DM working a full-time job and CoDM working 1 day a week and not helping whatsoever. And yes, it did make the situation in our apartment very awkward, and eventually everything fell apart shortly after, forcing F and I to move out after living there for less than a year for our own mental well-being. I mentioned prior that F at the time was running 2 other games that DM and CoDM were players in, as well as myself, S, and some other friends. I'm sure it will surprise no one that CoDM was also a problem player in these games. I've got some stories from those games as well before we had to basically kick CoDM out of them, so if anyone is interested in hearing those, let me know. TLDR, problem player rushes DM into running a game in which their NPC is essentially the main character. The rest of us stumble through an awkward and plotless game for the sake of maintaining friendships until it comes to an end when, to everyone's horror, problem player NPC one-shots a PC and laughs about it. Also, there was an incredibly awkward in-game orgy that lasted 4 real-life hours. So yeah, regarding this, it sounds like CoDM had no intention of actually doing any of the actual DMing and just wanted to have a special character with meta-knowledge. I feel bad for the DM in this story because she seemed to be trying her best, and it was pretty apparent that CoDM was just using the title to his advantage and not helping her in the least. I don't think the idea of a CoDM is a bad thing inherently, especially if you're working with a system you're unfamiliar with. It could be useful to have a second person to just bounce off of. But it's kind of pointless to give someone that title if the DM is the only person that's putting any effort into the actual game. It doesn't surprise me that CoDM is a problem player in other games, The behaviors he exhibited in this campaign are usually not isolated incidents. First off, freaking over the gnome was really weird. Maybe he had a traumatic experience with one of these long-lived little dudes at some point, but the way he blew up at the mention of a nothing NPC shows a high level of immaturity in my opinion. And speaking of immature, to run around throwing money he probably didn't have at everything and saying that it's his mommy's checkbook is really off-putting to me. Like he's just flaunting his ability to use the DM role to have infinite resources. And don't get me started on not even having a character sheet. How are the players supposed to take anything this NPC says without a grain of salt, if there's no stats or spells written that can verify what this guy can actually do? Really, in the end, this all just seemed like co-DM's power fantasy that was being enabled by their partner. And for more proof of that, look no further than being at least level 5 in a first level party. So now touching on the character's death, I'm not familiar with Pathfinder, but I don't think you die immediately if you go to -1 HP. To be fair, the players were new to Pathfinder and likely didn't know this, but the whole death thing was probably not a permadeath situation. That being said, attacking another player for doing something that was asked of them for creative reasons and not just messing around was a gross overreaction on co-DM's part. I've never heard of a spell or attack that has no roll, no save, and can do that much damage at that level. I tried looking, but there were no spells that matched that description that did what co-DM said, so I'm thinking they either omitted a stipulation for the skill or was just flat out cheating. Lastly, let's talk about the Orgy because if they spent 4 hours on it, I can spend a minute. This is what would have been the last stop for me. Sex in D&D can be fine in a played down manner, and it can even be funny if your group is alright getting raunchy. But to spend 4 whole hours awkwardly playing out this sex party? While inexperienced, the DM should have picked up on the fact that no one was enjoying themselves here. No one except for co-DM, which makes me think that's the reason that it kept going. Wasting a whole session on something this foolish would be really soul-crushing and more than a little cringy. Let's keep the sex scenes to a fade to black, and if people want to RP them in private later, then have at it. Anyway, this has been a really long video, so let's go ahead and wrap it up here. Thanks for checking out the video and sticking around till the end. I hope you enjoyed it. I upload new content every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, so make sure you check out my channel for more D&D stories. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a goosebump in the comments below. I've been blown away by everyone's support so far, and it is appreciated. But until next time, be good players.